Hi, my name's Alex. I produce music under my alias Project AER, and today I wanted to run through the project file of my track Under the Stars, which is a collaboration with Kainbeats. It's out now on Mellotron Records / Ambience. I hope I'm saying that right. If I'm not, I'm sure I'll get in trouble. So I thought I'd just kind of run through just every single element in the track and just kind of break down like what's kind of happening with this track. So the way that this track started, Kainbeats sent me a kind of just a few stems really, but they kind of provided the whole backbone of the song, and then I just kind of built on top of that. He literally just sent me everything down here, I think it was, which was a cello, some pads, and a couple of pianos, which were playing the same thing. They were just kind of alternate pianos, and I've only used one of them, but we'll come to that. So first up is the intro, which is made up of a few things. So let's just narrow our loop down to this. So the first things that you hear are the piano, which is down here. So there's, as I said, I got sent two versions of that by Kainbeats. There's a different one which sounds a little bit different. I don't know if he used a different piano virtual instrument or something on this, but it's playing the same thing, but just sounds a bit different. A bit quiet, so let's bring that up. A bit, I'd say it has a bit more kind of like, it's a bit like kind of less soft in a way, but you know, very, very similar. But this version that we have here is the one that I kind of picked for the track. So then you hear in there as well, we have a little snare drum, which sounds like that on its own, but it's actually kind of going to a reverb bus, which is over here. And you can sort of hear that, and that's what you're kind of hearing together. I like to separate out my reverbs from my snares, just so it kind of gives me a bit more control. Because if you have your snare and the reverb kind of on one track, I'm EQing them both, or I'm controlling them both. So separating them out just gives me a control of my entire reverb mix. Because you can actually see if I listen later in the song, my reverb mix is all of my reverb. It's everything that's going there. There's hi-hats going there, there'll be some pianos, there'll be a bit of guitars going there as well, and then the vocals that we'll come to later in the track. But I just find that using buses and kind of sending reverb separately just gives me a bit more control. The other things that you hear in the intro, you have this guitar ambience which fades in. Really, really simple. I think it's a mix down of the guitars that we have in the kind of beat section of the track, kind of mixed down into one track and then kind of run through a Valhalla shimmer reverb with just a bit of EQ before it just kind of clean up the low end. Not too much going on there. Then we have this ambient piano, which runs throughout the whole track. I do this quite a lot in my tracks, where what I do is I kind of have, I use X4 Records Serum, a virtual instrument, and I load a sample into it, which is a piano playing like a few notes. It's a technique that I learned from the 1975 on like their latest record. They do this quite a lot, and I just fell in love with it. You kind of, you know, you have just one audio file of a piano kind of playing a C across, you know, like 3 or 4 octaves over a set period of time. You load that in as kind of, you know, in the noise oscillator, you kind of load it as the sample. You just set it to key track, so it's tracking your pitch, and because you're doing it as a C, it's kind of then transposing it all around, so you can play notes that are in key and you have this like randomized twinkly sort of piano. You can get a very similar effect from native instruments noir, but I really like doing that with Serum. You can also use other sounds. You know, you could use a harp and get these kind of random twinkly sounds. You can use bells. You could, you know, use a glockenspiel or something. But there's loads of cool things that you can do with that. So that runs all the way throughout the track. So let's use a busier section of it just to hear an example. On its own with no plugins, you can hear it's got a bit of low end in there. So there's an EQ just cleaning up that low end. You can see there's quite a lot going on there. We have a Reactor Fx plugin, which is using this free thing that I think you can get for Reactor called VHS in the Reactor user library. Google it. Google VHS Reactor and you'll find it. And it's just a really great way of kind of having that sort of classic lo-fi sound on something. You can be really aggressive with it. A lot of people use like RC20 or like Sketch Cassette, but this is something I've used in a lot of my tracks as well. Then just has a waves H delay, which is just delaying the pianos a little bit more to create a bit more kind of like noise with them, I guess. Then we have a reverb. It's then going to a sidechain, and ozone imager just to widen it up a little bit, so it takes up more of the spectrum. Continuing on with the intro, there's not too much else. In the second half, we'll add in a kick and a snare top. So you have the kick on its own, which is just a kick sample. Nothing special about it. Tiny bit of EQing. Looks like I've just kind of taken away some of the punch around sort of 170 hertz, and then kind of muffled the high end a little bit. I really like my kicks to be quite soft, especially for this sort of genre, so that they don't have like a sort of like doof feeling to them. It's more like a sort of, you know what I mean? And then the snare top is just kind of layering with the other snare, giving it a bit more of that sort of trebly sort of bite to it. There's also this little kind of transitional thing, which is I think this is a sample I recorded myself like ages ago, which is just me taking like a little sticky plaster and then just kind of like putting it together and pulling it apart. I think it was that. I don't remember. It might be something else. It says letter, so it could be like a letter opening that I've just kind of put on the same track or something. But hey, it has that sort of, you know, like something coming apart, like tearing sort of feeling. And there's no tail on it. I really like when you kind of have samples that kind of have like a sort of really hard stop on them, and it helps create that sort of transition. And that is it for the intro. So let's move on to the beat. So the drums on their own sound like this. So quite basic. Usually kind of, you know, sometimes I might do a bit more for my drums. Sometimes I will just layer a couple of loops together that, you know, I've downloaded from somewhere that can sound pretty good. Sometimes I might want to use hi-hat samples and percussion samples and create my own, but in this case I found two loops that just work really well together. So on top of the kick and snare we had in the intro, we have this little kind of clap percussion loop. It has quite a lot of other noise in there as well, which helps. And then we have this hi-hat loop, which again has a bit more noise in there as well. I like kind of just having samples that are a bit imperfect. It just helps fill up the frequency spectrum and also just adds a bit of uniqueness and charm to them, I guess. And then those two together sound like this. Really quite simple. For a drum beat for me, that's really quite straightforward. Sometimes I might, you know, with like something like the claps, I might have set it to pan around and move around the stereo field, but with this track I think the piano as well is so centric that I didn't want to do too much to take away from it. Then we have a bass guitar, which is just my bass guitar, which is down there. I'm not going to go and get it. Just recorded into a guitar rig with a bit of EQ and then a bit of compression using CLA 76 from Waves, which sounds like this. That's the whole song. The bass guitar sounds like this. Bit of EQ on there, just to kind of, you know, focus in on that low end. With bass guitars, I don't always like to have, you know, the whole frequency range in there. Sometimes you want the kind of string noise and things like that, but sometimes with my bass I just want the low end, and I've rolled off the absolute low end just to kind of clean the low end up a little bit. Ambient piano continues as before. We then have these two guitars which come in. We have one on the right side and one on the left. Just kind of repeating the same thing. I really like having guitars, like one or two of them, that just repeat the same thing for quite a lot of the song. It can, then when you start layering them in with other things, it can create these really kind of interesting sounds that almost sound like they're meshing together and kind of creating new melodies each time. I think that repetition can just interweave with, you know, different parts like really, really nicely and kind of create some really nice harmonic information for the song. I have no idea what I'm talking about, by the way, so, you know, I don't know if these are technical terms. This is just how my brain processes it. So those two together sound like this. And they're obviously there kind of, you know, to work with the pianos that we've kind of introduced as well. Just sounds quite nice altogether. We have a pad, so this is one of the pads that Kainbeats sent me. And I haven't done anything to it. I thought these were just lovely, so I've just kind of left them as is. It's the same pad on 2 tracks. I kind of do that quite a lot. We'll come to that. But yeah, these just sounded lovely. I just thought that didn't need anything doing with them. All they're doing is they're going to this little chords bus, which has a tiny bit of EQ on it just to kind of keep the low end out of all of that. And a slight sidechain. This is quite rare for me. I usually use quite a lot of sidechain on my tracks, but I just thought, you know, with the instrumentation in this, it sounds really nice. So I didn't want to kind of take away from that too much by giving it a very heavy sounding beat. What else do we have here? So that's pretty much that bit. Then we add in this little guitar lead part, which comes in around here. Which again, it's just my guitar going into guitar rig, very similar to everything else in the track. We then go into the second half where we add in this strumming guitar. And that's just the high end of it, just to kind of give it like a really textural sort of feel. I like with kind of elements like this, them being quite subtle. It's quite good with acoustic guitars as well. And it's one of those things that if it wasn't there, you wouldn't really care, because if I mute it and we play the song, it still sounds very, very nice. But if we add it in, you start to really notice that it's there. And you can hear the way that it's interweaving with the kind of guitar parts on the left and right that we looked at a second ago. You can hear that it's kind of breaking up that repetition, so it doesn't just sound like they're droning on and, you know, everything's not changing, you know, that when we hear those 3 together, we get this. And then with the piano as well. You can tell the piano is really carrying it and everything's kind of just working around that. We then have these 2 synths. One is an Absinthe from Native Instruments, which is a lovely little synth. Really, really simple, just kind of playing the same thing and kind of repeating throughout. Then we have a synth that's in Serum, which is kind of layering up with that on the right hand side. So kind of contrasting sounds, but together they just sound quite nice. But you can tell that left one is kind of really dominating. Kind of like the strumming, that's quite a very subtle element, but something that I really like. Let's move into the bridge, which we have. It looks like what I've done is I've taken, I say it looks like what I've done because I make so many things that I end up forgetting what I've actually done. So I've actually taken off kind of the drums a bar early and taken away the bass guitar and used this kind of sine bass along with a little sweep and some wind chimes to create this little transition here. So it's kind of created out of these 3 things here. And the synths keep going. So we get this little, let's put the synths in there as well, shall we? It's really quite nice and simple, but I really love the kind of difference in the kind of bass guitar to the sine bass. So, yeah, I mean, when I say sine bass, it's literally just Serum with a sine wave loaded to kind of do the low end with a bit of attack taken off it and a bit more of a release on it, because otherwise you get this very clicky sound on a sine wave bass. There we go, and then we get into the bridge. So the bridge was something I had to kind of construct from scratch and still make it try and fit with the rest of the track. When Kainbeats sent me this, he didn't have a bridge, you know, in terms of like this. So you can actually see his piano stops here, and I had to kind of create something from scratch. So I created my own piano to try and blend with it. So that's just something I've played in. Haven't quantized it or anything. I think it sort of complements it quite nicely. We then have the pads in here as well. Same things from earlier, just turned down a little bit, and then they have this fade in and fade out on them. We then have this kind of choir of vocals that I've put together. I'm not a vocalist, really, but I like doing these little vocal things in my tracks, especially when they're kind of subtle, and I'm really proud of the bit that we'll get to in a second. So with this, I've only recorded 3 vocal parts. So we have this part on the left, which I'm not going to play for you solo, and then I've kind of added a duplication of it, put it on the right-hand side, and form and shifted it up a bit, I think it was. Yeah. To kind of create that extra kind of space, and also like slightly different voices, because if you just listen to the 3 that I recorded, but when you add in those formants, just a little bit wider, a bit more interesting, to kind of creates a bit of an illusion of there being more voices, even though they're playing the same thing. We keep the guitar strumming here, but what it's doing here that's a bit different is it's fading in and out, so it's kind of coming and going. But using Wave's Mondo mod, which is a plugin that kind of allows you to modulate things around the stereo field, it's kind of moving from left to right relatively slowly, just to create a bit of movement and make the bridge feel a bit more dynamic. We'll come to the guitar solo in a sec. Then there's the drums, which are just, I think, the hi-hats and the snares bounced out, and then they are sort of put on a very narrow EQ. So if we listen to these, so you can actually hear if I take everything off, it's just the drums, and then with the EQ, and there's a bit of reverb on them using Valhalla Vintage Verb, and then Mondo mods on these again, at a slightly different rate to the guitar strumming, so everything feels like it's just moving around kind of independently of itself. Of each other, rather. Then there's the guitar solo, which is kind of 2 recordings. I like to kind of, with guitar solos, I like to give the illusion that they're played as kind of one thing, but in most cases they are kind of maybe 2 or 3 recordings, sometimes a bit more, kind of layered up to kind of find the right melodies. I might kind of improvise in like 3 or 4 different solos and then kind of pick the best bits of each one. So with the piano we get this. Actually left in a bit of string noise there, that's very professional of me. And that's it. And then I fade back in with Kainbeats' piano, which kind of brings us right back in. So there's a bit more going on here. I'd like to kind of, build up throughout a song and then kind of crescendo towards the end. So what we have here, we have the piano coming back in from earlier, the pads coming back in, but also this time we have the cello that he sent me. I'm assuming it's a virtual instrument cello, but I think with these sorts of things, you can really get away with them as long as they're not like the focal element. And you can sort of tell here that it's just kind of, adding that little bit of extra sort of quality to it that just separates it out from the first section that we've been hearing. There's then these vocals, which are kind of 3 vocals again. I haven't formatted them or anything, just doing this little kind of do-do-do sort of melody, which is something I quite like doing. So kind of doing the same thing, there's a little bit of alternation. The center one is a lower octave one, I think. It's not. It's the side ones that are a lower octave. All with a bit of auto-tune on just to kind of tighten them up. The guitar strumming from earlier comes back, as does the guitar ambience and the synths. I think that's pretty much everything. Although we have this guitar lead that we heard earlier, this one, which then has kind of a separate version in the outro. Oh no, that is a different part. I wondered what I'd done with that. So this is a guitar lead that I kind of recorded for the bridge that never got used in the end. And we can actually hear that on its own. So I've pitched it up an octave, so if I pitch it back down, it sounds like this. So where this is kind of interesting, and I do this quite a lot in my songs, is I take the kind of guitar part that I record, and before it even hits the amp simulator, so if we just listen to just the guitar, so there's no amp simulation on there or anything, it sounds like this. I then pitch it up an octave, which sounds kind of naff on its own, but what I really like about that is it kind of has this unnatural sort of element before it's even hit a guitar amp. So then when it hits the guitar rig, it sounds like this, which already sounds cool, if a bit ear-piercing. I then clean it up with a bit of EQ just to kind of make sure there's no lows in there. It looks like I haven't really touched this EQ though, which is maybe a bit of a bad thing. And then that uses Valhalla Shimmer reverb again to kind of create that ambience, which is on a 100% reverb mix. So that then sounds like this. This is quite a good way to kind of get extra mileage out of other parts that you might have recorded. So you might have recorded a guitar part and you want to kind of create a bit of an ambience, but you know, for whatever reason you can't record any more guitar or anything or something like that. You can actually then transpose it up an octave. So you kind of get that unnatural sound. You might want to reverse it. You can mess around with it. I really like kind of finding ways to kind of use something that I've recorded more than once, but kind of in a way that feels fresh each time. Like I'm not just kind of recycling the same thing over and over. But it also kind of helps keep a sort of consistent sort of melodic quality to a song as well. Something I really like doing. There is then also all of the vocals come back here at the end. And then just sort of fade out as we kind of go into the outro. And I thought I'd just let Kane's piano just play us out really, really nicely. There we go. And that is pretty much it. I think I've managed to remember to go through everything in there. The only thing I didn't probably touch on was this little hi-hat. Yeah, just for a little fill, I've kind of added in these little kind of, sounds like this little sort of 16th Foley thing. Yeah, just to kind of create a bit of a fill at the end with kind of the kick and snare as well. And I think that is everything. So yeah, that's mine and Kainbeats' track, Under the Stars. That's kind of all the elements that made it, and I hope this was interesting to you. And thank you to Mellotron and Ambience for the release. It's a song that I'm really glad to actually see released. I was worried at one point we'd never actually get to release it. So yeah, thank you for watching. I hope you found this interesting. And yeah, drop a comment or all the YouTube stuff. But yeah, thanks, and I'll see you next time. Bye.